Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Localis's second LGR webinar, When the Sun Goes Down, what problems is LGR trying to solve and what problems might it create? My name is Jonathan Warren. I'm the Chief Executive of Localis, an independent think tank of place. And the purpose behind and the intent behind this webinar, with no wasn't deliberate on the timing. Our first was on April the 1st, hold the line, looking at the politics and policy behind the process. With this webinar, When the Sun Goes Down, we want to look at what is going on under the bonnet in a bit more granular detail. And to address this, we have assembled a fantastic expert lineup to talk this through with us. In terms of the housekeeping rules, we've begun at 11. We will finish at 12 on the dot. I'm going to set the context very briefly, and then I'm going to introduce our speakers to give their view on where we are, what we're trying to solve, and how we might maybe forestall any problems or create fresh opportunities from the LGR process. I'm going to invite all our audience to put questions in the Q&A box to ask our panel to go into some of the detail for us, and we will seek to answer your questions as they come through to the best of our professional ability. So that's it. That's the scene for us today. So in our previous webinar, we looked at the whole rationale behind LGR. Now, since then, the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill is now an act, and it is the most significant structural upheaval outside of central government since the 1970s. And what's it all about, Alfie? Well, clearly the creation of new unitaries is designed to increase productivity and streamline governance with the aims of devolution, but as well as providing residents with better quality public services. Now, the logistical challenge of merging multiple district unitary counties into these new authorities cannot be overstated. And the outcomes we're going to get are being shaped now by the production of the interim plans, the consultations, the great deal of shadow transitional work, both formal and informal, which are accelerating the decision making while we're speaking. And these significant design choices now will have massive consequences, first, second, tertiary order for local government further down the line. I think our point at Localis is that since these governance and operational decisions may look technical, they will quite rapidly have political impact. Because let's think about these choices. They include things like warding and representation, scrutiny, standards and accountability, committee structures, delegation, locality arrangements, senior officer responsibilities, as well as the integration of contracts, data and systems. We regard these as the load-bearing beams of the new unitaries, and once set, these load-bearing beams will constrain or set the tram lines for what's feasible financially, in terms of service delivery, as well as what these looks like in terms of democratic legitimacy for at least a generation. So a lot at stake here. And all of these questions, never-ending questions, aren't they, are placing increasing pressure on senior local government leadership and their capacities amidst a constant changing national political scene, making clarity around this extremely valuable. So the intent of this webinar is to discuss all of the above and to address how LGR as a process can be delivered successfully. Some of the guiding questions we'll be looking through with our panel: scale as a means to what? What do we mean by scale? Does it by capacity, consistency or control? And what is the democratic calculus or price of each? Looking at cost as a political choice, when the transition costs, in our view, are real, but are routinely underpriced. Think about things like workforce harmonization, IT platform convergence, contracts, data migration, governance redesign, all these issues, rationalization of estates. how do we deal with costs as political choices, and sequencing as strategy, in terms of having to fit everything in the right order, unlike Eric Morecambe's line with Andre Previn about all the right notes, but not necessarily the right order. Is the current sequencing as well as the pacing of LGR fit for the complexities of what we're trying to address? So some serious issues to address in the course of today's webinar, but lightening our load, or being our load-bearing beams, is our fantastic panel. I'll tell you who we have and who in the order they'll be speaking. So first up, we have Rachel Barker. Rachel is Director of Reviews, Strategy and Engagement for the Local Government Boundary Commission for England. Also graced by Lawrence Ainsworth, who's Executive Director of Resources for Lancashire County Council. Huge pleasure to have Richard Flinton, Chief Executive of North Yorkshire Council, with their recent experience. And finally, Nicola Neal, who's Director, Commercial and Place for our good friends at Local Partnerships. So them's the rules. Our panelists are going to speak in that order to give their views about where we are in the LGR process. Once they're all done, I fully expect to hear from our audience with questions, hard and easy, for us to debate amongst ourselves until our power hour is done. So Rachel, can I ask you to unmute and get us going? Thank you.
Right, good morning everybody. Thank you, Jonathan. So as Jonathan said, I'm Rachel Barker. I'm the Director of Reviews, Strategy Engagement at the Local Government Boundary Commission for England. I have been with the Commission for a little under a year, having joined from a district council in Hampshire that was subject to LGR, so saw some of that process whilst in that role. A little bit of background about who we are at the Commission. As many of you will know, our primary role is to conduct electoral reviews of local authorities, looking at the number of councillors in the authority, the ward boundaries and the ward names. We are independent of government and work directly to Parliament through the Speakers Committee. In relation to LGR, there's a couple of things that are probably worth pointing out as part of my introduction. So firstly, we have no formal decision-making role in relation to LGR. The development of proposals has been for the councils involved, and the decisions on the new councils has been a matter for government and ultimately Parliament. And then secondly, in a bit more detail, as a Commission, we can only carry out an electoral review once an authority exists in law. And given the timescales that government are working to for this round of LGR, we won't be carrying out a full review between the new authority being established and its first election. So we'll talk a little bit about interim arrangements. So given all of this, what have we been doing as a Commission in relation to LGR? So our role in the process to date and going forward, hopefully, is one of being a helpful advisor and critical friend, both to councils and to government. This is outside of our primary role, as I've said, but we have experience and expertise as an organisation around electoral arrangements that we've been looking to share in an appropriate way. Our independence from government is important to us, but fundamentally we want the process to run as smoothly as possible and for new councils to have a robust foundation in terms of both councillor numbers and interim electoral arrangements to start their journey from. Those in attendance this morning may well have seen that we have been invited to be a statutory consultee for some of the proposals that have come forward for LGR. They're the ones that have included external boundary changes. So that is the proposals that haven't used districts and boroughs as the building blocks for new authorities. And if it's helpful, I can touch on a little bit about our approach and how we've done that during the panel discussion. So at the current time, our team are working with 4 areas where decisions have been announced, so the tranche 2 areas. We're working with the local implementation teams to offer advice and support on interim electoral arrangements, and those proposals are due back from councils to MHCLG at the end of this month. We're offering advice and the benefit of our experience, noting that those decisions are for others to make. And then finally, in wrapping up, interim arrangements will, of course, be just that. Every newly created authority will go through a full electoral review during its first term. Councillor numbers and ward boundaries proposed will get the authority up and running, but the second set of elections, which in most cases are likely to be in 2032, will be on revised arrangements that are fit for at least the medium term. We as an organisation, therefore, will have a peak of work in a few years' time, reviewing all newly formed authorities ahead of these elections in 2032. And in preparation for this, we're looking to work really closely with those new authorities and the wider local government family to ensure future reviews are carried out in a way that supports authorities at a time of really significant change for the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for getting us off to a very, very good start indeed. Can I next invite Lawrence Ainsworth to give the view from Lancashire County Council, please?
You can. Thanks, Jonathan, and good morning, everybody. I'd just like to start saying a little bit about Lancashire. It's an absolutely wonderful place, but we do have every form of local government that I think is available to us within the county. We have 15 principal councils with 12 districts, 2 unitaries and the county council. We also have a combined county authority and many parish and town councils as well across the piece. In relation to LGR, collectively across the 15 areas, 5 proposals were submitted to government, and we await our minded to decision we expect in the summer from the Secretary of State. Having been through the process in Cheshire many years ago, I'd agree with you, Jonathan, that LGR certainly has its benefits, but also the transition brings its challenges. And we're really at a kind of pivotal point, really, in terms of some of the decisions that we make now that will pave the way for new local government. I'm reminded that we have 688 days left until vesting day, not that I'm counting. So the transition period is actually a relatively short period of time for the enormity of change that we have in front of us. And I think it's important just to acknowledge the scale that we face in relation to LGR. And I describe it as a mega project on par with some of the biggest things that are affecting the country and the public sector at the moment. And I think we need to treat it as such. So just in terms of some thoughts that we have in front of us, clearly we have a significant and complex change. We have both aggregation of services and disaggregation of county council services within Lancashire. We'll have to transition statutory services, transition staff. We'll need to onboard new elected members, have a new IT setup, a firm financial foundation. So a huge logistical challenge. And then throughout all of that, not lose sight of the overarching purpose of unitarisation and grasp the transformational opportunities that are available to us. And it's worth bearing in mind that the world will not stand still during LGR. We have a significant amount of national policy change happening at the same time across key areas like growth and housing, children's services, adult services, etc., that we need to keep our eye on whilst vesting day approaches. So just some thoughts to share around our approach here. I think with so many moving parts, it's absolutely critical that we have a coherent programme and we plan in a considered way and act fast. So plan slow and act fast is some of our thinking at the moment in terms of how we best use this time. If we take really uncoordinated and hasty action, that will be a real challenge in terms of a confusing transition, but I think it will also mean we have new unitaries that don't have the coherence that they need. I'm glad to say that isn't the case in Lancashire at the moment. We're working very collaboratively across the 15 councils with really strong programme arrangements that underpin that. I think the other point, given the scale of what we have in front of us, is that evidently we'll need to prioritise the essential components of the transition and make sure that safe and legal is our watchword. But I think it is really important that within all of that, we do think about the transformational opportunities and we plan now for what they might be. So a real focus on day one, but not losing sight of day 2 onwards in terms of what we want to do and what we want to achieve. And the final point I'd like to make is around collaboration. I think that needs to be our watchword through this journey. Collaboration across councils, across partners, with central governments, with communities, elected representatives. And I think acting in that collaborative way will help us with the transition, but also hopefully embed a real collaborative mindset in the DNA of the new authorities. Thank you. I think you're muted, Jonathan.
Many thanks indeed, Lawrence, for that and the reminder I was muted, and introduce Richard Flinton to now. Obviously, you've done this at North Yorkshire, but you were chief exec at the county since 2010, since which we've had 6 prime ministers, but only 1 of you, which is something to say about local government stability, Richard.
Well, thanks, Jonathan, for that. And it's always good to be following a Lancastrian, isn't it? Reminds me of my most favourite FOI, which was, what would you do if invaded by Lancashire? To which I, of course, replied, bring it on. But Anyway, very good to be with everybody. So North Yorkshire is 3 years old as a unitary council. We were formed out of 7 districts, county council, with a population of 640,000, with the 3rd largest unitary, and we cover the largest geography in England. So we're a complicated beast to bring together, but we feel like we've done the journey, and we feel nearly there with 1 or 2 systems issues still to resolve. But what I'd say to everybody is it is absolutely worth the journey. What we've got out of it is we are more efficient as a consequence of it. The levers in one single place is a vital important thing locally, and that strong local leadership. So I would definitely advocate it and for people to commit into it with a real purpose. I also am a bit critical about the government's devolution agenda and the lack of clarity around responsibilities at different layers. So I think without LGR to add further clarity between our tiers, that just becomes so messy. So we've saved money out of it. One of the important issues, so we've saved around about £70 million. And I do understand that part of that is we were aggregating to a single level. And I think there's more savings opportunities out of that and more challenges for others who are disaggregating. But on the flip side, and as Jonathan mentioned in his intro, there are issues to consider around costs here. So interesting to note, we set aside £38 million to do the transition. We've not worked our way entirely through that. We're probably about 26 million pounds into that, with some more serious systems costs to come. But the issue that everybody needs to consider is the opportunity costs through these next 2 years in terms of lost savings or deferred savings. So you need a strong grip on your financial position as you consider the journey in front of you. What I'd also say has been important for us is to consider how we operate at scale. And that's one of the points that Jonathan was testing to us really in his questions. And the way that we've responded to that is looking at how can we operate most systems at the maximum scale available so we can get productive efficiency, increase innovation, resilience, etc. But at the same time, not forget there's another level of economy at the local place by going with the grain of the local place. We've got a very strong locality agenda in terms of area committees, what we call community partnerships, some devolution to town councils, quite a dispersed delivery model as well. And to have that nous and finesse to understand when you've got to go with the grain of the local place is hugely important. And my final point in this slot, Jonathan, is just to talk about the importance of sequencing, really. And so my point here is the level of transformation to be achieved versus the importance of speed of getting to a converged point. And you want to have the maximum amount of ambition, look for best practice in your councils, try and implement the best and look at what there is nationally. But you can only do so much of that. And I would say pace is king on this. For us, getting to that converged space as quickly as you can is absolutely vital. So I'll leave that there. Thanks, Jonathan.
Richard, that's fantastic. Many thanks indeed for sharing the North Yorkshire experience. Final speaker from Local Partnerships, Nicola Neal. Please let's hear from you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and good morning, everybody. So my name is Nicola Neal, and I am a director in Local Partnerships, LGR and Transformation Practice Area. So I've over 20 years experience in local government, primarily in a unitary authority, actually, because I'm based in North Wales. And my career history is predominantly working in the corporate backbone of organisations, covering topics such as strategy, governance and transformation, of which LGR is a particularly complex example, I'd say. I just wanted to mention something about local partnerships for those on the call that might not be aware of us. but we are a public sector delivery partner. We're owned by the Treasury, the LGA, and also the Welsh Government. And it's our role to lend capacity and expertise to both central and local government departments on most service areas, really. So within our organisation, we've expertise in terms of energy, waste, regeneration, housing, and in my case, local government reorganisation and transformation. In terms of the work that we've been doing on LGR, we work directly with councils on bespoke packages of support, and our approach can see us working with councils at pre-decision stages, post-decision, as shadow authorities are being created, and we also lend support and advice in terms of both post-vesting transformation. We've worked with Surrey and Suffolk, Rushcliffe councils, for example, but as well as working directly with councils who call on us to lend that capacity and expertise, we also provide tools, talks and guides to the sector as in general. So we've a website that's established, and we've run some webinars and developed some toolkits, having looked at historic and national lessons learned. So, for example, some of the costs and those political choices, we have developed some guidance on preparing for data migration and estate rationalisation, all of which seem to be very time consuming. So our advice generally is to identify those areas that offer significant political choices, and really to prepare those involved both culturally, technically and practically, in order to be able to move at the right pace and make best use of people's time as you move through that transformation journey. So absolutely agree, Richard, that pace is really important, but also echoing Lauren's point, preparation to deliver with efficacy at that point is really important too. I think some other general observations that we've made through the course of our work and recommendations that we make to councils that we work with is that it's really useful to establish a shared programme management office in the early days. We recognise that vesting day is just a milestone as well. It's not the end game in any way at all. And focusing on the key features of the new organisation as it is being created, and developing a blueprint for what that organisation might look like is something that we recommend as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you to Richard, Lawrence and Rachel. We've got 40 minutes for questions, answers and heated debate. Let's see what we've got here. Rachel, first question to you, I think specifically to you. Colleagues, feel free to join if you want to. Tom Horwood asks, while we would expect in the course that the full boundary review may have implications for parish wards, will the interim reviews have any implications, or will parishes and parish wards be untouched? Over to you.
So I'm not going to say too much here. I've answered it in the chat. I mean, essentially, the timescales mean that some of the work around interim arrangements will be the best possible fit. So areas will be looking at any line on a map that effectively exists in law. So making up the new arrangements based on parishes, wards and divisions. Can't speak for exactly how each area is going to approach it, but given the timescales involved, it will be an exercise as looking to where they get the best possible fit. We're working with those authorities to try and encourage them to get the best possible balance across our statutory criteria. So the things we would look at a review. So considering electoral equality, but also thinking about the kind of geography and sense of place there, and getting them as right as possible, or as close to possible as what may follow in a full review when those criteria are looked at in much more detail in due course.
Many thanks, Rachel. Tom, I hope that answers your question. Let's move it on. Great question from Keith Luscombe, who asks, do the panel think that recent government decisions, such as in DPP, devolution priority programme areas, and the Sussex consultation, suggest ministers are now open to or even encouraging boundary changes compared to, say, the 2025 expectations? Also, do the panel feel government fully understands the additional complexity this could bring, particularly compared to using districts as the building blocks, for example, in disaggregating key people-centred services. Any thoughts about that general direction, as well as what this means for those crucial people-centred services? Anyone to take that? Step right in. Lawrence, you...
Yeah, happy to jump in on this one. Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks for the question. I think just zooming out a little bit, it's probably worth saying that I've been informed that in terms of LGR history, a disaggregation into more than 2 unitaries in a county area hasn't happened since 1998, and that was Berkshire, and I think it was on district boundaries. So clearly, some of the decisions that have been made recently in relation to the DPP seem to be going in a direction much over and above that in terms of precedent. But I think government is very keen to say it's not a precedent, and we must take them at their word on that one and see what the decisions are that come through in the summer. I would say, though, that it does inject inevitably more complexity. The greater number of disaggregations we will need to take forward, and in many ways that becomes double disaggregation if you include disaggregation of districts as well, and a lot of service delivery footprints will not align to those boundaries, as will, how we account for things, how funding is distributed, how the funding formula works, etc. So it inevitably will bring additional complexity throughout all of that. That's certainly a point that we have raised with MHCLG to recognise, and I think within that context it's more important than ever that we do share some of the lessons across the sector and are really open about some of the challenges and try and collaborate around some of those practical issues around disaggregation.
Thank you, Lawrence. Anyone else wants to come in from the panel on issues about boundaries and disaggregation?
Well, Jonathan, I'll just make a comment that I suppose I worry a little bit about how the government is thinking its way through these. It is bringing in a lot of complication for councils, and particularly the distraction factor of having to deal with delivering all of those services, particularly the ones for vulnerable adults and children, at the time that you're disaggregating. So I do worry about that, and I'm sure if government are listening to this, they do need to think these things strategically through. I'm sure there's some very strong voices locally from MPs, etc., but they do need to make sure that they're understanding the doability of this, the financial challenges that councils are going to have. I mentioned the costs in North Yorkshire. I think if it's disaggregated, quite significantly, then again, the ability to pay that back is going to be much more elongated. I'm not saying there won't be savings, but I do think that this is, potentially a difficult situation the government's going down.
Many thanks. Anyone else want to come in? Nicola, Rachel?
I was just going to jump in, if I may, because I think in my starting comments, I sort of said I'll talk a little bit more about the role we've played as a statutory consultee. So as the Commission, we took a very narrow look at the proposals that had come in, and our principal area boundary guidance had been published and promoted by government to those who were preparing proposals. And we were using the criteria of that, which sets out what makes a good external boundary, and comparing that against the relevant sections of a business case that had come forward and was being consulted on. So what we weren't doing, as we would normally do if we were conducting a principal area boundary review, would be to look at a whole host of external evidence, but we were trying to base our comments on that. I think it's fair to say that for those who are preparing the business cases, they are looking at such a wide range of different considerations in relation to LGR, trying to extract that level of detail around boundaries. You did see a very different treatment across the proposals that did come in. But just to kind of jump in and say that was the approach we took, was to use the published guidance and to also look at the information that had been prepared as part of the business case.
Many thanks, Rachel. Nicola, you want to share your perspective on this?
I think that we've covered that, Jonathan, so happy to move on and answer some other questions.
We'll move on. Because related to what Richard said, the question from Thomas Guyton Day. Question to all the panel: what types of services are best delivered at local level, with respect to what you were saying, Richard, about delivering with the grain of local places, that sort of sense of place sensitivity. What does local mean in terms of service delivery when you're going through the LGR process?
Yeah, well, just to talk a little bit more about that, Jonathan. What we've done is we're a big place, and we have a strapline about being the largest but most local council. And for us, some of the things that has meant has been breaking down or bringing together staff around particular areas, groups of towns. So we've picked up on some of our MP boundary. We've got 7 MPs in North Yorkshire, so we bring people around in those areas to worry about the place. We have a very strong localities team that works with local groups, local businesses, local community groups, worrying about the place and feeding into services about issues that they've got to pick up on. We've done lots of bespoke arrangements, particularly around community safety, where we've got some very differential arrangements around the council area. But at the same time, then counterpoising that with looking at opportunities where you can maximise scale. So it's doing the two things together, having the nimbleness of thought and doing the right thing around that.
Many thanks for those insights. Anyone else from the panel want to talk about sense of place and appropriateness of local services?
I was going to jump in here, actually, Jonathan. I think what's really important is to consider the relationship between the new unitary authorities and those local government or more community government institutions, and to think perhaps about what the blueprint is or the desired vision, perhaps co-created between the new authority and those local services, about how they will work together, where the relevant relative expertise and the local community voice can best be heard, so that good outcomes can be achieved for all.
Many thanks.
Just to add to that, I mean, I think I agree with both Nicola and Richard. I think a couple of points. I think there's sometimes a bit of a binary choice that's framed between scale and localism. And clearly some of the examples that Richard has explained, you use the benefits of scale to invest in local delivery and local influence and neighbourhood engagement. And there is, I think, a way those two things can be married up. And then just to Nicola's point as well, I think, clearly there is something about local service delivery models that we have an opportunity to rethink. My plea would be that we do that and look at the whole system. So it's not just about local government services, it's about all of the services, all of the assets, all of the different players on the pitch and different local communities. If this is just about rearranging deck chairs of local government services, we've missed something. I think this is about starting with that collaborative mindset and building something that genuinely is integrated at the local level.
Many thanks, Lawrence. Rachel, do you want to come in?
I've just put a note on. Hopefully the noise isn't too bad. I'm at like a hailstorm here. It's just really, really loud. So I won't, in case I'm kind of there's too much noise. Hopefully it'll pass soon.
Exciting developments. Staying on the natural world, great question from Neve Tickner, who asked, do we have any recommendations for ensuring nature is embedded into functions and assets through LGR and prioritised as key to growth, infrastructure, health? So any thoughts about natural capital and LGR?
Share one, Jonathan, that's okay. And that so it is good to be able to think of these opportunities when you're building your council and how you're establishing the overall structure and your ability to specialise in what some people might think of as relatively niche areas, but fundamentally important in terms of how the place is going to develop and how you maximise opportunities, whether that be around people's well-being or whether that be around the economic agenda. So I think one of the benefits that we've got in North Yorkshire is that we have a specialist team who are working in this area that we've never had before, bringing people together who can specialise within that team and give it a real focus that it's never had before. And of course, some of the obligations around this are going to mayoral combined authorities, so we've got to work closely with them as well.
Many thanks, Rick. Anyone else want to come in before we move on?
I was just going to add that I would agree with Richard. I think painting that picture about the contribution that nature and the environment can have on wider well-being, be it economic, health, etc., for the new authorities is really key. And there's plenty of evidence out there. So I would say that, you know, as new authorities are establishing themselves, just try to harness that evidence to make that case for trying to mainstream nature and environmental solutions into your business with the broad positive impacts they can have.
Thanks, Nicola. Okay, I'm going to move us on to address the human factor, as if all this process couldn't be managed with an existing staff and preparing for a new one, as if we're waving magic wands here. Two related questions, one from David Godfrey, who asks, have you found, or where could you expect to find, potential gaps in officer capacity or capabilities in new authorities and structures? And Thomas Skyton Day asks, any thoughts of managing staff through the LGR process? It must be extremely unsettling to work in a local authority in the midst of being abolished. So any thoughts about the capacity gap and managing it as a process whilst the organisation you're in is on the cusp of being abolished? Richard, your hands up first. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's two really important questions, Jonathan. And in our journey, these sorts of points were really occupying our time. And the issue about how staff are unsettled is something that we've all got to recognise and absolutely face into. So the big thing that was obvious to us is people were hugely proud of the organisations that they'd worked in up until this point. And we worked enormously hard to be very respectful of that and respectful of everything that those organisations have achieved. And what we did was we made a real commitment to use the talents from every organisation, and that included taking risks with some people who wouldn't have operated at the scale or across the range of services in their careers before. But that's paid enormous dividends to us, both in terms of buy into what we're trying to do, but also the great people that we've had out of that, and also to involve them and to involve as many people as possible in every level of your work around different work streams, etc. The big thing for me is own it as a council. Don't outsource this to somebody else, and try and meet the capacity challenges that you have through clever thinking within the council. It's very easy to go and try and buy a load of programme managers from an organisation. For us, that was poor value. The best value was trusting in the talents that we had, organising that and taking some risks around it.
Many thanks, Richard. Well, I've got a fan mail from Alison Smith, who asks, for Richard Flinton, what were your top 3 lessons learned from your experience? Give us 3.
3. Mention 1, which is pace, the importance of pace. We've just been talking about communication was absolutely fundamental. Access to everybody as well at this stage. People getting partial communication is, a desperately difficult thing. The ability to talk about the journey and the milestones and the things that go wrong, all of those important communication messages. And don't forget the small stuff as well that will just irritate staff, and being on top of that at every avenue and relating their lived experience in your new council back to them and the journeys that they've been going on for you to seem relevant to them and how they're experiencing it. So there's probably loads of others, but I'd pitch those 3 to start with, Jonathan.
Much appreciated. Throwing back to Lawrence, Nicola, Rachel, any thoughts about the human factor, the staff, present, future?
So yeah, I mean, it's I think number one for me in terms of a consideration throughout all of this. For me, we have started to communicate as much as we can prior to a decision. That's difficult because you can't provide a huge amount of clarity to people around what that might look like and what it means for them. But what we are trying to do is emphasise as much as we can the positives, acknowledging Richard's point that people are very proud of the current setup. But there are amazing opportunities through both the transition and through the new councils in terms of different career routes and different opportunities to make a difference that we are emphasising. And I think the key thing for me as well, just on the point about staffing concerns, I completely agree around trying to source as much capacity as we can from existing resources locally. But inevitably that does have an impact on the day job and on the other priorities that our members and communities are expecting. So there's some very careful prioritisation, I think, that needs to be done throughout this journey for everybody who's going through this process around how much bandwidth we actually have to be able to achieve things during this 2-year period, and what are the absolute essential things that we need to do alongside LGR, and what are some of the other things that we might have to either park or do differently. And having that conversation now, I think, is pretty important, rather than having that further down the line when it really does start to bite as we get closer and closer to vesting day.
Thank you, Lawrence. Nicola, Rachel, anyone thoughts about the staffing
Just going
side?
to add, I wanted other colleagues to speak first. Very conscious that our part in this is a small yet important one, but I think just trying to make sure as an organisation that we are conscious of where local government is at the moment, and the way that we approach our reviews and our business takes account of that. I think that's really driven the approach that we've settled on around LGR, which is to try and offer that experience and advice at an earlier stage. I'm a netballer. It is kind of very much here if you need. Please do pick up the phone, do get in touch. The answer might be that we can't help, but please do go and do that. We've got commissioners who have experience of LGR in the past. We're really, really drawing on that at the moment, and just trying to think about our processes, not only now in this stage, but as we move forward, because we will come and meet these new authorities and have a time-bound piece of work that we want to do, but we want to do that in the most collaborative way that we can. And hopefully that's an ongoing conversation as authorities work through that process and kind of guide how that can work in practical terms.
Thank you, Rachel. Glad to know the hailstorm bombardment has ceased. Nicola, any thoughts your side?
Yes, certainly. So first of all, I think on the staffing point, leadership is so vital, I think, in terms of creating a compelling vision for the positives that can come from change. So I think that political and executive leaders of councils are the people that staff tend to look up to for this. So that can't be underestimated. But also the management functions that are put in place to support staff through change are really important. So frequent communication, painting the vision, understanding what fears people might have and doing what you can to allay them, I think is really important. And probably setting out clear timetables for when people might feel change, so that they are clear about what they can expect and when, and also perhaps about what concerns they can park for now. I think as well as plans come nearer to fruition, it might be that organisations have different HR options to put in front of people. And therefore, crossing over with the second question around where there might be capacity pressures, I think it's really useful to paint or to provide some options for staff as change starts to be implemented, whether they want to go for new roles, whether they might want to look at redundancy, 2P arrangements, etc. So I think clear pathways and processes for staff really what seemed to be appreciated in terms of transformation work that I've supported before, both pieces of transformation work that have gone well and also where things have gone wrong. And in order to facilitate that, HR capacity, I think, is one area that's really important to make sure that councils going through this change can fulfil. Another area that where departments managing change alongside business as usual, which creates a pressure, is in terms of ICT and the data involved in that. And then I would also say that change and project management are key skills to really to bring in or to bolster in organisations ahead of the change. So in local partnerships, as I mentioned before, we can lend that capacity, but we also lend sector support to perhaps raise the skills or the confidence and the abilities of programme and project managers within organisations. And actually next Tuesday we are hosting a webinar on creating a programme management office for LGR as well, so I can share details about that to attendees, and also happy for anybody to contact me with any queries.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. Let's send us a link. We'll pass it through once we're sending it. Our thank you notes. Okay, some people have got their hands up. If you've got your hand up, please put your question in the Q&A box. I'll look in the things in the chat. I'll look at them too. Clive Gilbert has given us a consummate localist question. To what extent is LGR an opportunity for improving local government democracy and community engagement? Do the enlarged authorities mean they'll be more remote, or could the pooling of resources and perhaps new resources and powers from central government support better public participation? So is larger and fewer an opportunity for closer, hyperlocal, better? Over to you, please.
Well, I would answer yes, Jonathan, that I think the issue is around the clarity of the leadership that you have, particularly just playing something that Rachel was saying earlier on. We went through a situation where in our shadow year, we put in new ward arrangements before the new council got up and running. So we had single member wards, clarity of who was the representative there. We've built locality teams around them. We've engaged with the voluntary and community sector. We have community partnerships around our 28 largest market towns that our members are at the centre of. So I think the locality factor and that local leadership is stronger now than it's ever been before. And the ability for the local representative to have access to the council levers across the patch that will help them sort their issues out or get a hearing around their issues. I think that's probably clearer than they've had before. So I think it is a trick you can pull off. We're working also very closely with town and parish councils. We are blessed, if you want to use that word, with around over 700 of them. So we have plenty of opportunity. And that is another point of local representation and engagement that we respect and work with as well.
Many thanks, Richard. Anyone else want to come in on that engagement side?
Only to agree, Jonathan. I think that is one of the major opportunities, is to reset the relationship between local government and its residents. And for me, there is something about that's not about a complicated set of committees. It's very much, as Richard described, a different set of relationships that can be forged at a local level. And there's also, for me, the great opportunity of clearer accountability around local members, what they're responsible for, and their routes into local government and their routes outwards into communities as well, where we have a major opportunity. But for me, that happens by design rather than accident. So very much sounds like Richard's experience has been one where this was a kind of conscious design principle of how local government would work through North Yorkshire. That's very much what we would like to see in Lancashire. And whilst we have 5 proposals in the system, actually, if you actually look at the objectives of what we're trying to achieve, there's a lot of commonality, and local democracy and community engagement is paramount across all of those objectives.
Many thanks, Lawrence. Nicola, Rachel, want to come in on this?
I'm just going to jump in and talk. I mean, one of the things we've been saying, we did some webinars back in the summer when proposals were being worked upon, and really encouraging those developing proposals to think from a blank sheet of paper, to then start to think about what you need to achieve as a new authority. And our perspective was around councillor numbers, so the number of councillors in the new authority, which is one of the things that needed to go into the proposals. and not only think about the kind of governance arrangements and things like scrutiny functions, but actually how the kind of representational role of councillors works, thinking about the way that that new authority will engage with communities. These are all things that we will think about when we do a full review. And the reason for raising it was to try and encourage people to get as close to the right size as we can do from the start. So to stop the thinking around, we've got these existing wards, divisions, and we'll build from there, but actually to start to embed that thinking at the very beginning. And they're the types of things that we will ask people as they go through the review to kind of put together in the proposals to us. So kind of a neat link as to how it loops back when the Commission do come in to do that review.
Thank you, Rachel. Nicola.
Yes, just reflection, adding weight to Rachel's point to think about after listening to Richard and Lawrence's perspective as council officers. And obviously, as councils gain a bigger footprint, the classic risk is that some people will feel that local democracy might be out of touch. But I think Lawrence and Richard's response just demonstrates the importance and the opportunity that's here for newly formed councils to think about how they do the relationships that they do want to create and the systems that they do want to create. As Rachel said, it's a blank sheet of paper. So my message would be to really think about how you want those relationships to work and design for them and implement them as closely as possible.
Thank you, Nicola. Well, we're in the last 10 minutes now, so we'll keep them rolling through quickly. Related point, Thomas Guyton Day, we'll keep on this topic. Any thoughts about the reduced number of councillors in an area? Clear as an area aspect of local democracy to all this. Does that impact you in North Yorkshire, Richard, or survivable?
Well, I can say very firmly, Jonathan, that nobody has ever bemoaned the loss of councillors in North Yorkshire as we moved from 340 of them to 90 that we currently have. And I think councillors themselves feel that we've just been through our Boundary Commission review and they considered the number of councillors, and there was some variations either way, some actually wanting fewer than 90. So I think they feel very comfortable with that number. It gives them a very meaningful role. They feel that they have a profile within the council at that, and they're able to own their patch. And we know from all the engagement that they get through the media and through their local groups that they appear much more visible than was the case before. So no, it's not been a problem at all, Jonathan. Many
thanks. I'm going to push this on. Times are pressing. Are we trying to do too much at once? Nicholas Spence asked, do places have the capacity and capability to make the most of both LGR and devolution simultaneously? Do you see evidence places are overloaded, given the additional thing? And Keith Luscombe again asked a very similar one, concerned about the complexities of LGR alongside other public sector reforms, NHS, ICB, SEN, policing, justice and all the rest. Are we trying to do too much at once?
So I suppose my short reflection on that is that it's a very, very demanding challenge that has been set to the sector. And in terms of the multiplicity of things that we're facing at the same time, it is very difficult. I go back to my experience in Cheshire many, many years ago. We went through this in a very different landscape, both in policy terms and fiscal terms as well, in terms of headroom to make this change alongside other things that are happening. I think I just come back to the point that it needs really careful prioritisation locally, real honesty, I think, with the centre as well around the enormity of the challenge that we are facing, and where there are some national policy changes that are happening at the same time, how we best align them across governments is an ask that we will repeatedly continue to make. And for us to flag those issues at the earliest opportunity to see if there is a conversation around how that can be managed. And real honesty locally as well around bandwidth, which I think I've covered before. But a real challenge, I think, that we're doing this across 21 areas in a really complex, challenging area. It's something that the sector, no doubt, will find a way through, but it will certainly put us to the test.
Thank you, Lawrence. Richard, please.
Yeah, I mean, on the complexity question first, that is a challenge. There's lots happening. My one probably unhelpful remark to that is, do not turn insular, and you've got to embrace and engage with all of those other developments that are taking place in other organisations. So there's a potential opportunity for you just to focus in on your change, but that would be a mistake. You've got to retain the ability to look outwards. On the Devo and LGR point, we delivered Devo and LGR at the same time. I think we're the only council so far to have done that. And yes, it is a stretch, and we ended up having a small PMO that was managing the Devo change, as well as a much larger PMO dealing with the council's change. So we managed the two things together. It is doable. Lawrence's point is absolutely right. It's careful management, prioritisation, working your way through the issues, being very careful about looking out for people who are overloaded with work from multiple directions, and checking out the resilience of your team as you work through so many competing objectives. But we managed to achieve it, Jonathan.
Many thanks indeed. Rachel, Nicola, any thoughts? Is it too much, too soon?
Not much more to add from me, just to kind of say that we recognise some of the challenges that are existing there. So just trying to respond to those in the best way that we can in terms of our role.
Yeah, and similar from me, I think Richard and Lawrence have drawn on their own experience for the audience.
Okay, well, I'm going to try and round up the last couple of questions before we end at 12 bang on the dot. Justin asked if anyone has an answer to this. To what extent does thinking around waste management include recovery of resources for waste for use in energy and food security? Yay or nay?
I would say, Jonathan, that I think this probably comes back to the opportunity that LGR affords organisations, again, in terms of refocusing and creating a new vision and a new blueprint for how they want to work. Certainly, larger authorities offer larger, will have larger amounts of buying power and be working at a bigger scale, that they might be able to negotiate around energy, etc., more successfully than smaller councils can. So I think that at the moment, consideration of energy, of recovery from waste, is not something that is mainstreamed, but LGR might give organisations the opportunity to mainstream it into their business if they so wish.
Many thanks. Another question from Keith Luscombe. It might be our final question. It comes back to you, Richard. He asked about your points on communications were really helpful. In North Yorkshire, did you mainly communicate once you'd reached firm decisions and milestones, or were you proactive in setting expectations about the timelines for LGR to manage staff uncertainty and avoid dead air and concerns escalating?
Just constant communication, Jonathan. It wasn't around milestones. It was talking about the journey, what we're going to do. I'm a big believer that you've got to describe the tunnel that people are in and the light at the end of it. And you've got to mark your progress along that. You've got to acknowledge the ups and downs and the bumps and the things that went wrong. We did a couple of dumb things around trying to job match people, and we created a bit of turmoil that we could have avoided. We were very honest with staff around that. We brought people back on board with that level of honesty, sheer visibility and getting out there. One of the issues that's difficult in this next phase is access to all staff. So if you get a chief executive that's appointed, you may have some councils who are offside around that, and the ability to access all staff and to have the same consistent message, to describe how you'd offer a level of security to people on the front line, and the opportunities for savings are not so much there as in other places. So I think you've got to paint a picture of security, involvement, the benefits, but keep marking the journey at the same time, Jonathan.
Many thanks indeed. Final question. I'll wrap this up. We're going to call quits in a few seconds. But Hadley Wells West from Hampshire asks, can LGR be used to rebuild the democratic deficit of greater and greater spend on fewer and fewer statutory services, which the wider electorate don't get to see, like adult social care, children's social care send. Is it going to be the panacea very quickly, folks, to local government's existential financial service conundrum?
So I'm happy to jump in on this one quickly. It's certainly not a panacea. Having looked at sort of this journey elsewhere and so on, there is still challenges that remain after unitarisation, but it certainly does help. I think it does create a buffer in terms of financial efficiencies that may not otherwise have happened. And beyond that, I think it provides opportunities to look at services differently. So this is more about doing things in a very different way rather than just reducing overheads, combining housing with adult social care, for example, and getting into more of a preventative set of services so that we're really managing the demand and cost in those statutory services, not at the expense of some of the other much loved discretionary services at the local level.
Lawrence, thank you very much. And at which point I'm the call time on today's fantastic webinar, in which I think we've addressed all the questions. Thank you to our fantastic panel. Rachel, Lawrence, Richard, Nicola, we've learned a lot from you today. Any questions, we can keep the conversation going, and we hope to see you at a future Localis webinar. I think we'll be next back in town on the 17th of June with local partnerships again for our devolution report, everything in its right place. Take wonderful care. Thank you all again. Bye for now.